Martin Perez is back. The Rangers have signed him to the $19 million qualifying offer. What does that mean for the Rangers rotation? What does that mean for the rest of the offseason? Taking a big look at Martin Perez coming back. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Paddock, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. Today is Tuesday, November 15th, and Martin Perez is officially coming back. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Paddock. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Now, the most important news of the day, it's a few hours before the deadline that I'm recording this, 11:43 a.m. Central Standard Time, and it has just been announced about an hour ago that Martin Perez is officially coming back. It has been reported by multiple different reporters, including John Morosi and John Heyman, and Martin Perez's agent has confirmed that he has accepted the $19.65 million qualifying offer. Congratulations to Martin Perez, who is making by far the most money he has made any one season in his career after a fantastic season, absolutely delightful breakout season that I don't think anybody saw coming except for maybe Martin Perez himself. This was an excellent deal, an excellent year for him. Made his first All-Star appearance, his 11th full season in the big leagues, accrued 10 years of MLB service time. He was just absolutely excellent. Signed a 1-year, $4 million deal after the lockout to kind of shore up the Rangers, give them some middle of rotation depth. I thought, okay, sure, fine, whatever, bring him back. The Rangers, I thought, needed one more starting pitcher. Turns out I was probably right. But Martin Perez did way more for this Rangers team than anyone could have rightly expected. He finished the year with a sub-3 ERA. He pitched in 32 games, 196 innings, 169 strikeouts, and a 5.0 baseball reference WAR that was, I believe, top 5 in the American League. He was fantastic. Won AL Pitcher of the Month in May, was just absolutely electric, gave the Rangers some depth, gave them some much needed innings, went 5+ in the last 30 starts of the season. Started out with 2 4-inning outings and then was absolutely dominant for the rest of the season. Had a little bit of a slip up later in the season, but was still, even his slip up starts were still fine. We're still fine. He gave you everything you wanted from the top of the rotation guy. Some consistency, was healthy all season, and the Rangers thought, well, this was fine. This is a nice, fun season. Glad to have you back. Loved having you here. This is age 31 season, and he's never done anything like this before. This is kind of what the Rangers expected from him as the ceiling on him when he came up. He made his major league debut back in 2012 as a 21-year-old. Man, it's been a long time since then, but this is the kind of guy who the Rangers thought they could be getting. He had a really nice rookie year, full rookie year in 2013 as a 22-year-old, a sub-4 ERA, 20 starts, 124 innings, finished 6th in Rookie of the Year voting. Thought, all right, this is going to be a nice little guy, middle of the rotation guy. Maybe he can, get a little bit better and find a little bit more control over his stuff and maybe get a few more strikeouts, But no, he never really found his way, was just kind of an average middle-of-the-rotation pitcher, had a really, really bad final year in Texas in 2018, so they let him go. He went to Minnesota, was not super great there, 165 innings, just kind of back end of the rotation guy. Started in Boston for 2020, was fine, middle back end of the rotation starter there. Was a back end of the rotation starter in 2021. End up losing his job in the rotation for a Red Sox team that did not have a lot of starting pitching. Came to Texas on that deal. Everyone's like, all right, sure. They need a lot of pitchers, and if you can get one that's just serviceable and fine, then okay, whatever. I guess I'll take it. But He absolutely blew all expectations out of the water. This was huge for the Rangers. The Rangers decided not to trade him at the deadline, which I thought, all right, if you're not going to trade him at the deadline, you absolutely have to extend him. The entire reasoning behind that was, hey, we want this exclusive negotiating window where nobody else can, approach him theoretically for a long-term contract offer, and we want to be able to, keep him here because we like him. He loves it here. The young pitchers really look up to him. He related a lot and worked a lot on the backfields with some of the prospects in spring training. Like, hey, especially those young Venezuelan kids saying, hey, this is a 10-year big league veteran lefty who was Venezuelan, came up literally on these exact same backfields and really took a lot of these young starting pitchers under his wing and provided a lot of leadership and a lot of value in that clubhouse. The Rangers loved having it around, and he loved being back here. It is no longer the kid who didn't live up to expectations. He was just the veteran looking to come home, and he blew all their expectations out of the water. Now, the Rangers, it seems like with John Daniels not in charge, with Chris Young in charge, it seemed they were a little more hesitant to offer a long-term contract. So it seemed like the qualifying offer was going to be what was going to happen with him. As soon as they put that offer on him, and they thought, okay, well, whatever he was asking for, it seemed like maybe the Rangers were even hesitant to go for 3 years and $13 million apiece for those 3 years, which I think, in all honesty, would have been an absolute steal. And Martin Perez is like, no, I'm at least worth that. I'm not going to take any less than that. Maybe they were offering 3 years, $36 million total, which I think would have been a big mistake for him to take that. I think it might end up being a mistake for him to take the $19.65 million qualifying offer. There were a lot of thought that he might get some longer term contract offers. But at this point, this is where the rotation stacks up if the Rangers don't sign anybody else, which, again, I think there's no way in heck that they don't sign at least one, if not maybe two more starting pitchers. I think probably just one. But that one has got to be a pretty big one. But right now, the Ranger rotation looks like this. Martin Perez, followed by John Gray, followed by Jake Odorizzi, followed by Dane Dunning, and lastly, Glenn Otto. I like Glenn Otto. I've talked a lot about him. I think he had a pretty good year for what he was asked to do, which was probably more than was fair to ask of him. Maybe he'll end up making his way into the starting rotation, fighting out for that number 5 spot, but I think having Dane Dunning and Glenn Otto in there is like, you got to have one. You got to have one. And I think Dane Dunning is the more reliable, more consistent option of those two. And the amount of innings that Dunning gives the Rangers, I think, is just gives him a little bit of an edge over Glenn Otto. Coming up, we're going to look at why Martin Perez took this deal, what it means for the Rangers, what they're going to do next, and why it was so important to keep Martin Perez in Texas. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at BetOnline. If you wanted to bet on the Eagles being fraudulent and losing to the Washington Commanders last night, and you did that, then good for you. You probably made a good bit of money. If you could find a line on there for TCU versus Northwestern State, and you bet on Northwestern State, then you probably won a lot of money because TCU also fraudulent. Oh, funny thing that who could have seen that coming? But there's all kinds of different lines there. There's a line for the Rangers signing Aaron Judge. If you feel confident about that, then well, you can go put some money on that. I don't know if they have lines for who Jacob deGrom signed with or who Carlos Rodon signs with, but you should go and check it out. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, let's look at why Martin Perez ended up taking this 1 year, $19.65 million qualifying offer. Well, to put it bluntly, he hasn't made a whole lot of money in his career. Now, I know. He's a major leaguer. He has made a lot of money. He has made more money already, made more money in one season than I will make in a decade. Probably, at least that. But for big league standards, for a guy who's been in the big leagues for now 11 seasons, $34.166681 million, according to Spotrac, is not a huge lump sum. And he's been healthy. He has pitched a lot of places. He has never been absolutely outstanding, and so he's not made these big offers. The most money he's made in a single season was $4.5 million in 2021 with the Red Sox. He also did get a $500,000 buyout that year to make him a free agent after last season so that he could come to Texas. So $5 million total is the most he's made in a year. This past year, he made $4 million with the Rangers, and while he could have made a lot of money, maybe $45 million, maybe he wouldn't have made that on the open market, and the Rangers would have signed him to a multi-year deal of that 3 years, $36 million. I don't think that would have been the case. I think somebody would have been a believer that this season was the new Martin Perez and not a fluky one-off deal. But Perez betting on himself. The Rangers have paid him in salary for 9 seasons. That's including his first stint and this most recent stint. Salary-wise, they've paid him $20.665 million. So they also paid him a $1.58 million signing bonus when they signed him to a contract extension when he was still, I believe that was in 2016, I think is when they signed him to that contract extension to kind of buy out some of his arbitration years, hoping that he would get better, and that did end up being the case. But this is basically almost doubling what the Rangers paid him in 9 seasons, all in 1 year. And it's kind of a bet on himself deal, which also the $4 million deal, maybe that wasn't really a bet on himself deal. He talked about earlier in the season that he had some multi-year offers from different places, but he wanted to go to Texas. He wanted to go back to the place where he made it to the big leagues for the first time. He wanted to go pitch for that organization, and he felt some comfort there. And, he absolutely outperformed any expectation for what he could do. And so this is like another bet on himself here, which is kind of weird because usually when you take a 1-year prove it deal, I don't know if that was necessarily a prove it deal. It's just like this is what's their deal. This is definitely I know I'm better than that. It's kind of like Marcus Semien did when he took that 1-year deal to be in Toronto after he had a really poor 2020 season, had a really great 2019 season, finished top 3 in MVP voting. He didn't get the extension that he wanted from the A's, got kind of a slap in the face for a contract extension offer from them, said, I'm better than what you think I am, and went out and had the best season any second baseman's ever had, I think, in at least the modern era, maybe ever, in Toronto, and the Rangers signed him to a big old deal. And maybe Martin Perez is doing that for himself here. And I'm hoping that he does the same thing. But how likely is it that this was just a fluky season? Well, let's look at some of his advanced numbers and his walk rate. He didn't strike a bunch of guys out. He didn't, limit walks the way you would think a guy who is pretty reliant on control and command would be. But the thing that he did really, really well is that he missed barrels. He just missed barrels at an elite rate in the top 8% of baseball for how often he got barreled up. Nobody was making hard contact with his pitches. They were just grounding out very weakly, very softly, very often. And I think part of that was having a catcher behind the dish that he trusted and having such a great framer steal a bunch of strikes, so that forced hitters to be more aggressive. I think Jonah Heim being an elite defensive catcher really, really helped out Martin Perez. I don't think it's like the entire reason for him having this great season, but I think it was definitely a big help. And I think that if it was a lot of Mitch Garver this season, maybe Perez wouldn't have done as well. Maybe he would have. I don't know, but I think just having a guy to get you into more favorable counts, steal the occasional strike like Jonah Heim did, I think that really, really helped. By the way, congratulations. Speaking of elite defensive catchers, former Ranger Jose Trevino has won the Platinum Glove for the best defender in the American League overall, not just for any catcher. He already won the Gold Glove for that, but the best defender overall was Jose Trevino. I think that's pretty amazing. I also wish that Jonah Heim would have gotten some love and been a Gold Glove finalist for catcher because I think he absolutely deserved it. Trevino was a little bit better than him this year, framing-wise and throwing out runners. I think that's where Trevino had a little bit of an edge on Jonah Heim there. But still, great season for him. Happy for the former Ranger, and this now current Ranger is having a great season. But you look at some of the things: the velocity, the strikeouts, the curveball spin, expected batting average. None of those are really anything that stand out as being super elite. And so maybe that's what the Rangers were thinking. Like, okay, well, this is a nice one-off year, but what if he doesn't have Jonah Heim back there for him every start? What if he kind of starts to regress? What if he gets snake bitten a little bit by the walks? And one of the things that he did really well this year is pitch with runners in scoring position or with runners on base. He had a lot more runners on base than most of the other pitchers who were putting up the elite ERA numbers and WAR numbers and things like that he was doing. And he was able to pitch out of a jam very well. When you're a ground ball, soft contact pitcher, that's kind of what you do. But it's kind of like if you're a hockey fan being really good on the penalty kill. You get yourself, and it's great if you're good at it. It's great, but you don't want to put yourself in that situation where you can be stung too often, because sooner or later, no matter how good you are, you're still giving your opponent great opportunities to score on you, and you just would rather give them fewer opportunities as opposed to being better in dangerous situations. And I think that might end up catching up with him just a little bit next year, or maybe he goes out and does this again. Let's look at what happens if he does this again, why the Rangers might have been hesitant to give him this extension, and what some other lefties who bloomed late in the career might look like. But first, it's a word from our sponsors. Now, Martin Perez is had the best season of his career. He is back in Texas, and it is absolutely essential that the Rangers locked him down, because if the Rangers went into the offseason with John Gray, Jake Odorizzi, Dane Dunning, Glenn Otto, and question mark as their number 5, that would have been a disastrous thing if the Rangers went into this offseason with that. They needed Martin Perez. They needed somebody to eat a lot of innings. They have a couple of guys who have been fairly consistent in going deep into ball games and being fairly healthy. That is Dane Dunning and Martin Perez. John Gray has had some injury issues in his past, but still it's been fairly consistent for the Rangers. Did miss that 6 or 8 week stretch late on in the season, had a couple of IL stints early on in the year, but was fairly consistent and good when he was healthy. But having a guy who has been consistently healthy like Martin Perez, I think, is by far his greatest strength. He has never missed a significant portion of time. He did miss some time in 2018, but for the most part in his career, he has been fairly consistent and fairly healthy. That is something that the Rangers desperately need, especially with some of the guys that they are looking at getting in free agency. I mean, the two big names of Jacob deGrom and Carlos Rodon. deGrom has pitched, 92 innings in 2021 and 64 innings this past year. Did pitch 3 straight years of 200-plus innings and had a healthy 2020 in the shortened season. But Carlos Rodon, who is coming off a healthy season, did pitch 178 innings last year, but only pitched more than 150 once in his career, and that was back what will be 7 years ago in 2016 when he was just 23 years old. So there are injury concerns on both those guys. And for all you people screaming at me, why aren't you considering Justin Verlander? Well, I don't know that Justin Verlander wants to go to Texas. Maybe the Rangers could convince him. Maybe. It's entirely possible. But for all of your yelling about the injury concerns of Jacob deGrom and Carlos Rodon, I mean, Justin Verlander is coming off of 2 straight years that he did not pitch barely at all. He had 1 game in 2020 and didn't pitch at all in 2021. And this year, he's 39, had a fantastic season, pitched 175 innings, but he's going to be 40 next year. He's going to be 40. And he has, not only is he going to be 40, and, if somebody is going to defy Father Time and pitch until they're 50, kind of like a reincarnation of Nolan Ryan, which I don't think that Justin Verlander is, but maybe it's Justin Verlander that does that and pitches till he's 45, but maybe he doesn't. Maybe he completely falls apart. Nobody can fight Father Time forever. Eventually, Nolan Ryan did retire. Eventually, age did catch up with Adrian Beltre, as sad as it was to see, and it didn't catch up with him as much as it did for some other guys, but I am not willing to take that bet. I mean, they all have injury concerns, and so having somebody who is consistent in the rotation, who pitches a lot of innings, is incredibly important. And, as for, is this a fluky season for Martin Perez? Possibly, but nothing that he's doing suggests that it's something that he couldn't continue doing. I mean, he got away with walking a lot of batters. If he is a little more careful and has a better walk rate next year, then that could be something that improves. He doesn't get himself into as many dangerous situations. That could be a huge, huge benefit for him. He doesn't have, incredible stuff that's going to drop off. He's not, a premium velocity guy, right around a league average with a 93 mile an hour fastball, using a sinker a lot. The changeup is really darn good. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. The cutter works well. The curveball that he busts out very occasionally, and same with the slider. Both of those work well in the few times that he uses them. But, this is something that is repeatable. His expected numbers are a little bit higher than what he did. His expected ERA was 3.59 this year, which is, 0.7 higher, 0.7 runs higher than what he actually gave up. Maybe he regresses to around a 3.50 ERA pitcher. But if he's still a 3.50 ERA pitcher who gives you, 180, 200 innings, that's still a very valuable pitcher. And at $19 million, that's not a bad deal. It's not great, but it's not a bad deal. And, the Rangers haven't had a lot of pitchers with a 350-ish ERA for the years that they have been really in contention. Like, that has not been a thing that they have done super well. The offense seems to be pretty loaded, and just having a lot of... If the Rangers this past year, if they had three pitchers, they have three pitchers who had a 350... Heck, give them 360 ERA, who pitched 180 innings. They had three of those guys that are, kind of mid. I think this might have been even a 500 team. That's how desperately the Rangers needed some improved starting pitching. And so I think this is the new Martin Perez. And even if he slumps back a little bit, I think that's still a really darn good pitcher. There's a lot of cases for lefties who have burgeoned late on in their career. Those guys include such greats as Jamie Moyer, Al Leiter, Cliff Lee. Randy Johnson didn't really figure it out until he was like 29 years old, and he ended up being absolutely fantastic. Granted, Randy Johnson had a little bit different kind of stuff than Martin Perez did. I don't see Martin Perez growing, a foot or whatever in height, or 10 inches. Yeah, I don't think him becoming 6'10 and starting to throw 100 miles an hour. It took Randy Johnson that long to figure out how to throw strikes, but there are a lot of lefties that, bloom late on in their career. Cliff Lee was one guy that I mentioned that got sent down to the minors in his age 27 season, and then in 2008, or at age 28 season, he ended up winning a Cy Young and was fantastic for pretty much the rest of his career, including one of those years, or I guess half of one of those years in Texas. Jamie Moyer pitched until he was 117. Conservatively, it seems like he was maybe a little bit younger than that, but he really didn't figure it out at all until he was, a lot older. He didn't until he turned 36. That's the first year that he got some top 10 Cy Young years. Out of his 267 career wins, 233 of them came after he turned 30. I don't think that Martin Perez is going to become a Hall of Famer, but he's going to maybe end up being a Rangers Hall of Famer if he continues this streak, and if he does repeat what he did this year. If he has a 200-ish inning season with a sub-3 ERA again, I think he's going to start getting some really big contract offers. According to Spotrac, they had his market value at $17.9 million average annual value, a 4-year $71.7 million deal. I don't know how likely it was that he got that. Some of the comparable guys to him in deals that they looked at were Kevin Gausman, Joe Musgrove, Marcus Stroman, Luis Castillo. I think he might be a little behind. Well, three out of four of those guys, maybe he's about on par with Musgrove. I think he's a little bit better than Marcus Stroman. I think he might be a little worse than Luis Castillo, and well, maybe he's on par with Kevin Gausman, who had one really, really great season and then got a huge, huge deal. But Martin Perez, who probably is hoping in the top 5 of Cy Young voting. He didn't win one, and I think that's kind of what pushed the deal over the top for Kevin Gausman. I think that he won it. Maybe he's just fantastic. No, he was just fantastic. He did not win the Cy Young. Anyway, getting my guys mixed up. But I do think that somewhere in the $15-16 million range for 3 years was definitely on the table for somebody to pay. I think he really did want to come back to Texas. I think Texas really did want him to come back. But if he does this again, then I think somewhere in the $20-ish million range a year is definitely possible for at least 3 years, maybe 4. I mean, he is going to be a little bit older, but again, like I said, he hasn't had a whole lot of injury concerns throughout his career. I mean, he's going to be 32 next year. He'll be going into his age 33 season next year. Once he hits free agency again, I think a 3-year deal for $60 million will definitely be on the table. But I don't necessarily think that the, what was it, 80 something million dollars that I just said 3 seconds ago, $71 million deal is necessarily something that he would get. Maybe somebody, but there's not a whole lot of teams that are more desperate for starting pitching than the Texas Rangers at this point. And I think that retaining him had to be option, like priority number one, before you could even really start to think about getting a deGrom or a Rodon or even a Verlander or a Chris Bassett for I think you really had to make sure that you locked down Martin Perez, because having a guy who can be consistent, be counted on to go at least 5-6 innings, be healthy for every 5th day or 6th day, whatever off days are there, having that is extremely valuable. We saw that with Jordan Lyles, who provided a lot of value for the Orioles, having him in the rotation and eat up a bunch of innings. And same with the Rangers last year, even though Mike Foltynewicz was pretty terrible, having him out there every 5th day to go 5-ish innings, so they didn't have to ask a whole lot before they were ready for some of these younger guys was important. And I think having some of these bridge guys, even if you do lose Martin Perez after next year, giving these youngsters in the system like Owen White, Jack Leiter, Kumar Rocker, Cole Winn, Cole Reagans, giving them another year to develop and make sure that they are up when they are ready, not because the Rangers need them desperately or need somebody desperately to eat up some innings and save their bullpen. I think that is an important role, and the Rangers for $19.65 million are getting a decent deal. And now, as for what it does for them in free agency, I think this kind of makes it more difficult to get one of these top starters and a top tier bat. I did a couple episodes last week talking about what I thought the Rangers budget might look like. This kind of alters that just a little bit. I don't think it's going to stop them at all from going after Rodon or Verlander or deGrom. I don't think it's going to affect that at all, but I do think it's going to affect the quality of hitter that they can be able to afford, which again, for my own selfish personal reasons, I think makes a buy low, bounce back bat like Joey Gallo more likely. Someone in the Adam Duvall or AJ Pollock range could be a possibility, or maybe if they can get a buy low deal on Michael Conforto, I think that could be a possibility. But I think this pretty much takes them out of the Brandon Nimmo sweepstakes. I could be wrong. They could still be, going hard on Brandon Nimmo and maybe get a deGrom or Rodon. I think that would be unlikely, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities, because even if the Rangers do spend, $100 million on Nimmo and then 150, 140 or whatever on deGrom or Rodon, that still kind of puts them like right around the top 10, not anywhere in the Metsian range of $200 million. It's still going to put them around competitive payroll. It's an important thing to do, but I think maybe put those Brandon Nimmo dreams on the back burner. It was a nice thought for a while, but I think that this just puts them out of that range. I think maybe Benintendi might also be out of that range depending on how much he gets, but I think he's also going to be pretty darn expensive. The Jock Peterson sweepstakes was pretty much lost the second that he got the qualifying offer put on him. I don't think the Rangers are going to give up a draft pick for him. I do think they would, obviously, for Rodon or deGrom, but still, this is a good development for the Rangers, getting Martin Perez back. Again, I wish it was on a longer-term deal, but he is definitely betting on himself, and the Rangers are betting that they're are going to spend big on another starting pitcher, but having this consistent force in the middle or towards the top of their rotation, depending on who else they may or may not trade for, really, really does a lot for this team. So celebrate. This is a great deal for the Rangers, and I am very happy that Martin Perez is going to be back. As for where the Rangers see him, I think they pretty much see Martin Perez as a number 3, and him and John Gray are going to be fighting for that number 3 role in the Rangers rotation next year. I do think that they spend big. I think it's pretty likely, more likely than not, that they get one of deGrom or Rodon because of how desperate they are and how much money they have to throw around. And I do think that they are going to trade for a starting pitcher. I was going to do today's show on that, but I will be pushing that back to tomorrow because this news of Martin Perez came just a little bit early. But celebrate. Martin Perez is back. The Rangers have their workhorse in the middle of the rotation to save those young arms from coming up way too early. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the box score and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.